I'm with curator and art historian Jennifer Dudley, and I thought we'll take the time a little bit today to talk about memes. Something which I'm surprised to see how much crossover there was between the world of memes and the world of art history. There seems to have developed almost an entire genre based around using famous paintings and famous works of art and memes. So if you'd like to maybe just some opening points on that, where you think this may have come from, and we can just chat about that for a while. So yeah, over to
Yeah,
you.
totally. So I think, memes are undeniably a big part of visual culture and a big part of contemporary culture. When you're teaching students who are predominantly kind of aged 19 to 21, memes are their language, this is what they're engaging with every day. Um, Far more so than they are engaging with classical works of art every day. Um, this is something I've talked to my students about recently, is this kind of language of memes and how it relies on a certain kind of digital literacy, maybe not an art historical literacy. I mean, that's maybe something we can talk about. Um, but forms of visual communication that are very accessible to young people who have kind of grown up on the internet, and perhaps less so accessible to the more traditional audience for art history, your more kind of middle class, middle aged, older generation who aren't so literate in memes. So I think there's a really interesting point to be made around accessibility here as well, which again we
Okay.
might touch on later. Um, but yeah, I don't think it's silly to say that memes are kind of an essential part of contemporary visual culture, you know?
Of course. No, I 100% agree with you. I really like the fact you spoke about the word language. In media studies, we talk a lot about kind of encoding and decoding. And what I find particularly interesting about this, especially myself, as who doesn't come from a background of art history, is I can look at an art history meme. I can recognize the format of the meme. It's generally that Twitter statement, normally something quite miserable and sad about Netflix, what have you. And there's a painting there that I don't recognize, but for some reason, I still, to put this lightly, get the meme. I can still respond and I have a laugh and a chuckle. What role do you think kind of the aesthetic or kind of the motif of these paintings have within these memes? What
Yeah,
do
it's
you
an
think
interesting
that does?
question. Because I think the format of your traditional art historical meme, generally it's a work from more kind of classical art history. Often it'll be quite closely cropped on kind of the main subject's face, and that facial expression is telling us something about maybe this relatable mood or feeling or something that someone's going through. And I think often the language that's overlaid on that image is something, relatable. So like when Netflix asks you if you're still watching, or, something that
Yeah.
people can match that facial expression to that statement and think, oh, okay, that's me, or that's my friend, and I'll tag them in it. Um, so I think it's tricky in a way, isn't it? Because I think the art historical element isn't always as important, but it's kind of giving a face or giving a visual reference to that relatable statement.
Yeah. Do you think it adds maybe some kind of credence to the meme, some kind of validity to these, oftentimes ridiculous statements, that it's not just, an individual at home. It's like, oh, look at this kind of universality of this grand old painting. This person is sad and I can relate. Do you think there's something in that kind of, I guess, that universality to it?
Yeah, I think certainly it can work to make works of art more accessible to people. Traditionally, if you think about a museum context, you've got the work of art, you've got this big golden frame, you've got maybe a caption that's been written by a specialist curator with a PhD that I don't know if most people read anyway. But I think framing is an important work here. So it's kind of reframing a picture with something that is relatable and is accessible, and presenting it for a new audience. But I also think conversely, you might argue that memeing art history makes art history more ridiculous.
That's interesting. I like it a lot. Yeah. I mean, there's lots of talk within kind of, cultural studies and critical theory about, what is the value of a piece of art or a piece of culture. And it's like this idea that, you have the classic idea of, reproduction as destroying the value of art. But do you find this kind of theme, this mimetic process in some ways kind of reinforms these values or maybe adjusts these values in some way? I mean, what do you feel like is kind of the relationship developing there?
Yeah, definitely. And I think so. Well, you can argue about works of art in the age of mechanical reproduction, and I always tell my students, seeing a work of art on my PowerPoint is not as good as seeing it in
Yeah.
person. But I think we're not just when you meme something or memification, great word, um, or I don't think you're just reproducing it, are you? You're adding this new layer of meaning and this new context. Um, you could argue you're taking it out of context, but I think actually you're just adding this new context to it, which hmm, it's tricky, isn't it? Because I think in some ways it does give the work a new meaning and a new audience, but in
Of
other
course.
ways it does it puts the art out there. And I think people do, maybe it's just me, but I think people do see a work of art in a meme and think, oh, I like that work of art. Let's go and look it up and learn more about it.
Yeah. But I think that, I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned this word context because it's, you know, often, and again, I'm assuming here is that, or that's actually what you mentioned, that a lot of the works used in these memes aren't often the most popular or the most well-known kind of, almost kitsch, everyday, great pieces. It's often, an unknown painting or a relatively kind of minor work within some great artist. But for some reason, at the same time, it still conveys this message of art, while again being subverted by this message of, I know we use the example of Netflix, we'll probably just go back to it over and over again. So I think that's, I mean, I think there is definitely a potential in there to promote interest in art, but it's this irony that it's promoting interest in art on the one hand, on the other hand, kind of subverting any, aura or structure or value around these things. So must be some kind of cultural economy happening here, do you think?
Yeah,
Or, I
definitely,
mean,
definitely. And I think one of the big criticisms of art history as an academic discipline is this focus on the canon, this focus on these paintings that are indisputably great and everyone has to like them, everyone has to appreciate them. But actually, when you look at historical memes, you're right. A lot of them are relatively little known artworks or a very cropped detail of a larger work. So it's
yeah.
perhaps encouraging people to look at things outside of the art historical canon, resonate with paintings that have not been so celebrated, um, which I think is valuable in itself.
It it's almost as if you're arguing in favor of like the liberating potential of memes in regards to kind of the old stodgy ideal of the ivory tower of arts and art history. So that's a very, very interesting way to look at it. I mean, okay, one of the things, because we don't have much time here, I don't want to keep people forever, but one of the things we looked at in the class, we're looking at in the lesson, is this idea of textual analysis. And we don't talk about textual analysis in a specific literary sense in media studies. It's a much more visual kind of thing, classical visual culture things. Do you think there are any kind of key maybe methods that students of media studies could take from art history if looking at memes in general? Again, not just the art history memes, but maybe just classic visual analysis techniques that you think will be useful for a student outside of your discipline.
Absolutely. So something I really stress to my art history students is the contextual information around an image. Think about the context that work was made in and what it's trying to communicate. And I think with memes, more than any kind of other form of visual culture, they're very responsive to current events. So we've just had this thing in the UK that perhaps lockdown is going to end on the 21st of June. I immediately saw 12 to 15 memes about the 21st of June. So there is that idea, I think, of a time capsule and of things being very tied to a specific context. And like I say, that's something I really stress when looking at a painting or another work of art, is think about what was going on socioeconomically around that work being created. And I think perhaps even more important for something that is quite transient and quite internet based, like a meme. I would also think about any specific knowledge or specific kind of reading ability that you need to understand the meme, because you know a lot of them kind of rely on having seen something similar, seen the image before, seen the language before. For example, you know, there's that meme of the guy like tapping his head and it's like, you can't get caught doing this if you don't do it. But like that's something that we know because we've been exposed to that culture and that kind of microcosm, micro community of memes and their language. But then that kind of image or that phrase transforms and is easily editable, you know, open source, publicly editable and shareable. So I think thinking about what steps have been taken to arrive at this final meme is really interesting and important.
Yeah, you always wonder if the person creating them has a background knowledge within these artists or these work, or they just Googled classical painting or great painting, found the reaction they wanted. Yes, no, we could talk about this for hours, Jen. But thank you so much for your time. I do really appreciate it. I hope the students will gain something from this. Please know that I'll probably look you up in the future to talk about memes some more, if you don't mind.
Great.
But otherwise, thanks a lot. I really appreciate it.
Great. Thank you, Darren. Thanks very much.